On our third wedding anniversary, my husband gave me a set of expensive cosmetics in a red velvet box. That same night, he left on a business trip and called me to ask if I had applied the cream. I chuckled and replied that his mother had liked it so much she'd taken it for herself and slathered it all over her face. Suddenly, he howled into the phone like a wounded animal. "You killed my mother. If she dies, you're dead too." Exactly 10 minutes later, I kicked down the door to my mother-in-law's bedroom. The scene that met my eyes made bile rise in my throat. She was clawing the skin from her own face. Blood mixed with foam on the hardwood floor, and the acrid smell of burnt flesh hit my nose. Why had a simple cream turned into a deadly acid? And why was a small smile playing on my lips as I watched her convulse? My name is Anna, and I'm 28 years old. From the outside, my marriage to Victor looked like a perfect picture in a gilded frame. Victor was a director at a major biotech corporation in Boston, an intelligent-looking, polite man who drove an expensive car and lived in a luxurious townhouse. On our wedding day, all my relatives from my small town in Ohio said I had hit the jackpot, but only I knew what lay behind the elegant oak door, a dark dungeon where my life was being drained, drop by drop. My tragedy didn't begin with fists, but with Helen, Victor's mother. Helen was a domineering widow who considered her son a deity and his daughter-in-law a leech sucking his blood. In this three-story house, I had no right to a personal life. Helen had a sick habit of barging into our bedroom, rummaging through my things, and calmly taking whatever she fancied or, conversely, whatever irritated her. From brand-name French lipstick a friend gave me and an Italian handbag I'd saved for half a year, to the expensive vitamins my mother sent for my recovery after a painful miscarriage. She took everything, not out of need, but to assert her absolute power in the house. When I tried to talk to her with tears in my eyes, she would just jut out her chin, her gaze as sharp as a razor. "You wouldn't have any of this if it weren't for my son. What business is it of yours if I use it? For a small-town girl like you, it's a waste anyway." And where was Victor during these moments? He always appeared right when it was over, wrapping me in his deceptively warm arms, stroking my hair, and pouring cloying reassurances into my ear. "Mom's old. She has a difficult personality. Why argue with her and waste your energy? Tomorrow I'll buy you things 10 times better. You're my wife. Just be patient for the sake of peace in the family. I love you more than anyone." Peace in the family. That damned phrase suffocated me for 3 years. I learned to endure until I was completely numb. I started hiding valuable things in the trunk of my car, and on my vanity, I deliberately left bright but cheap trinkets for Helen to take. I thought I had found a way to survive in this hell, until the morning of October 10th, our third anniversary. A torrential rain was falling. Victor didn't leave for work early as usual. He made breakfast and brought it to me in bed. His eyes looked at me with an unnatural tenderness that sent a chill down my spine, though I couldn't yet understand the reason for my fear. He wiped the corners of my lips, then pulled a dark red velvet box tied with a beautiful gold ribbon from his briefcase. "Happy anniversary, my love. You've looked so pale and tired lately. I had to pull some strings to get this jar of cellular regeneration cream from Switzerland. It's an exclusive. You can't buy it in stores. Tonight, after your shower, be sure to apply it. You need to put a very thick, dense layer on your whole face and neck, and go to sleep just like that. Tomorrow morning, you'll wake up a completely different person." I took the box. It felt heavy. As I reached to untie the ribbon, Victor suddenly grabbed my hand, squeezing it so hard it hurt. "Don't open it. It's a pure concentrate. If you open it now, the air will oxidize the formula, and it will lose its properties. You'll open it tonight, right? I have a secret project today. I'm driving out to the lab in New Hampshire. I definitely won't be back tonight. Lock the door and be sure to put on the cream before bed. Promise?" His excessive enthusiasm was a bit unsettling, but I dismissed my suspicions, thinking he just felt guilty for being away on our anniversary. I nodded and placed the cream in the most prominent spot on my oak vanity. Victor left with a suitcase. I spent the day tidying up the house. Around 8 p.m., Helen returned from playing cards with her friends. As soon as she crossed the threshold, she, as usual, filled the air with the smell of cheap perfume and some kind of sweet liqueur. Passing my room, she threw the door open without knocking. I was folding laundry on the bed. Helen's sharp eyes scanned the room, and the sparkling red box immediately caught her attention. Without hesitation, she crudely ripped off the gold ribbon. The lid flipped open. Inside was a jar of completely black, light-absorbing glass with a silver lid, without a single label or inscription. I saw the glint of greed in her eyes. she grunted coldly. Still draining my son for all this luxury. Probably some whitening or anti-aging cream. We'll see if this stuff makes your face look any less provincial. I sighed and turned away. My fatigue had reached its limit. Take whatever you want, Helen. I'm sick to death of these fights over soulless things, after which I'm made out to be the ungrateful daughter-in-law. Later, when Victor calls, I'll tell him everything and let him deal with his own mother. Seeing my silence, Helen grew even bolder. She smirked, grabbed the black jar, and headed to her room at the end of the hall. The wooden door slammed shut with a deafening thud. The three-story house sank into an eerie silence. The rain drummed monotonously on the balcony. I went to the bathroom, washed my hair, and removed my makeup, trying to wash away the suffocating atmosphere of the day. The clock struck 10:30. I was drying my hair when the phone on the bed vibrated, displaying my loving husband. I turned off the hairdryer and answered, "Hello? Honey, I just got to the hotel. The rain is awful. Did you take a shower already?" Victor's voice sounded soft, but if you listened closely, you could feel a strange tremor at the end of his sentences. His breathing was ragged, like a man watching a monitor for an explosion he just activated. "Yes, I did. Did you get wet on the way?" "I'm fine. So, have you put on the cream yet?" "Put on a lot. A very thick layer. Do you feel a cool sensation on your skin?" "When you're done, turn off the light and go straight to bed. Don't stay up." That hurried, insistent tone reawakened my earlier irritation. Remembering Helen's smug face as she took my gift, I snorted coldly and deliberately spoke slowly, with full sarcasm. "What cream? That black glass jar you brought from Switzerland? Sorry, I didn't even get to touch it before your mother burst into the room and took it. She said she wanted to see if the expensive cosmetic would turn her into a fairy. She's probably smeared her whole face with it by now. You can buy me a new one tomorrow." Dead silence hung on the other end of the line. It wasn't a bad connection. It was the silence of frozen blood, of petrified muscles, the silence of someone who just had a bucket of ice water dumped on their brain. 3 seconds stretched into an eternity, and then my ears were split by a wild shriek. It wasn't a voice, but a distorted, ligament-tearing sound of a crazed creature. "She took what?" "She put it on her face?" I flinched, pulling the phone away from my ear, and frowned in extreme annoyance. "Are you insane? Why are you screaming? You know she always takes my things. How was I supposed to stop her? Oh my God, what have you done? Why did you let her have the jar? You've killed my mother. Go to her room immediately, take the cream, and wash her face. Quickly. If anything happens to her, I'll kill you." "You're a dead woman, Anna." My heart skipped a beat. The hand clutching the phone turned to ice. Why would a face cream kill someone? Why was the man who always told me to tolerate his mother's antics now roaring like a demon, promising to kill me just because she secretly used the cream? The words, "I'll kill you and you're a dead woman," pierced my eardrums and burrowed into my brain. A cold current ran from my heels to the crown of my head. The most primal survival instinct sounded the alarm. That black glass jar was definitely not a cosmetic. I dropped the phone on the bed and ran barefoot out of the room. The second-floor hallway was dark. Only a faint strip of light seeped from under Helen's door. Halfway down the hall, I smelled something strange. It wasn't the scent of chemical fragrances. It was an acrid, unbearably sharp odor, like burnt almonds mixed with such a strong smell of ether that my eyes watered. I pounded on the wooden door. "Helen, open up!" There was no answer, only a gruesome scratching sound, as if someone was furiously clawing at the wooden floor with their nails. Luckily, the door wasn't locked from the inside. I pressed the handle and pushed it open with all my might. The scene revealed, and the dim glow of a nightlight made my stomach clench. Bile rose in my throat, triggering a gag reflex. Helen was writhing on the floor at the foot of her bed. Her silk nightgown was torn to shreds. Her gnarled fingers, like an eagle's talons, were insanely scratching and tearing the skin on her own face and neck. The skin on her face, neck, and hands everywhere she had touched the cream was no longer human-colored. It had turned a deep crimson, then ashen gray, covered in tiny blisters. These blisters continuously burst, releasing a cloudy yellow liquid with a burnt smell. The torn skin fell off in chunks, exposing red, bubbling flesh. Her eyes had rolled back. Bright red burst vessels stood out on the whites. Her mouth was wide open. Thick white foam poured out in huge clots, mixing with blood from bites on her lips. She couldn't scream. Only eerie gurgling sounds escaped her throat, like an animal whose trachea was being crushed, cutting off oxygen. Next to her on the carpet lay the black jar. The silver lid was open. Some of the cream had spilled out. It wasn't a delicate white mass, but a thick ash-gray paste that foamed continuously with tiny bubbles and emitted a light smoke. That was the source of the nauseating, acrid smell. I stood frozen. My body trembled so violently my teeth chattered. My brain shut down for 5 seconds. In those 5 seconds, Victor's scream echoed in my head again. Put a very thick, dense layer on your whole face and neck. Tomorrow morning, you'll wake up a completely different person. Yes, if I had put that on my face, I would have turned into a rotting corpse, dying in unbearable agony. I didn't kill Helen. The person writhing in foam and blood, whose flesh was peeling off while she was still alive, was supposed to be me. This anniversary gift, this false concern, these 3 years of love, it was all a death sentence that my own husband had meticulously planned and elegantly packaged to send me to my grave with his own hands. But my mother-in-law's bottomless greed had made her the perfect substitute. Looking at the convulsing Helen, I felt no pity, only disgust, rage, and a thick, black fear that threatened to swallow me whole. I took a half step back, grabbed a towel from the drying rack, soaked it heavily with water from a basin, and threw it forcefully onto Helen's smoking face to stop the chemical erosion. Then I pulled out my phone and dialed 911. Emergency, 45 Maple Avenue, chemical poisoning, skin necrosis, come immediately. The wail of ambulance sirens tore through the quiet, rainy night. Paying no mind to my nightgown, stained with foam and blood, I coldly followed the stretcher into the vehicle. Watching Helen gasp for air through an oxygen mask, her face a horrifying shade of black, I slowly clenched my fists. Victor, if she hadn't taken that cream today, you would have been in a mourning suit tomorrow, grieving for your wife who passed away too soon. But God sees everything. Tonight, when you rush to the hospital, I will look closely into the eyes of the devil I call my husband. From the second that glass jar was opened, our marriage turned into a game of survival. And I swear I will not be your victim for one more second. The ambulance cut through the thick, rainy veil of the Boston night. The sirens beat against my eardrums. The cold cabin reeked of medical-grade alcohol. But that scent was powerless against the other stench emanating from the woman on the stretcher, the smell of burnt human flesh. It was acrid and foul, mingling with the scent of blood and the yellow fluid seeping from the black scabs on a face that, just yesterday, had arrogantly humiliated me every day. Now, Helen was just a twitching piece of meat. Her sunken chest heaved convulsively, trying to draw oxygen through the plastic mask. I sat huddled in a corner, my hands clasped so tightly my knuckles turned white. Rainwater from my matted hair dripped in cold drops onto my thin nightgown. The paramedic accompanying us constantly checked her blood pressure. Her eyes held unconcealed horror as Helen's vital signs plummeted. She turned and asked me about the cause, about the chemical the patient had come into contact with. I shook my head, my gaze glassy. I flawlessly played the part of a daughter-in-law in a panic over her mother-in-law's sudden crisis. But deep in my brain, everything was frighteningly clear and cold. I remembered the moment minutes before the ambulance arrived. Standing in the middle of Helen's acid-stinking room, looking at the black jar lying on the floor, I felt a survival instinct rise from the depths of my being. I knew that if I left the crime scene as it was, Victor would destroy the evidence at any cost. He was a biochemist. He knew exactly how to cover his tracks. So, before going downstairs to open the door for the medics, I pulled out a tissue, quickly wiped a smear of the gray cream from the edge of the silver lid, crumpled the tissue, and shoved it deep into the pocket of a jacket I had hastily snatched from a hook in the hallway. It was just a pea-sized amount of the cream, but it was my only ticket to dragging the devil named Victor into the light. The central hospital at dawn was deserted and bathed in the deathly white light of fluorescent lamps. The doors of the intensive care unit swung shut, and a red light came on. I collapsed onto a blue plastic chair in the hallway. My body was numb. Relatives of other patients cast sympathetic glances at me. They probably thought I was heartbroken because my loved one was on the brink of life and death. How could they know I was busy piecing together all the fragments of my 3-year marriage? Why did he want to kill me? Because I couldn't have a child after last year's miscarriage? Maybe he had a mistress but didn't want to tarnish his reputation with a divorce. Or, even more despicably, he wanted to gain something from my death. These questions wriggled in my head like maggots. Less than 40 minutes later, heavy footsteps echoing down the empty corridor pulled me from my chaotic thoughts. Victor appeared. He burst in like a hurricane. His suit was wrinkled, and his hair, usually perfectly styled with gel, was now disheveled and wet from the rain. But what made me shudder was his gaze when he saw me, sitting safe and sound on the plastic chair. Victor's pupils constricted. It wasn't the look of a husband relieved to find his wife safe. It was the look of a hunter who discovered his trap had snapped shut on the wrong prey. Disappointment, rage, and panic flashed across his face in a thousandth of a second before he could put on the mask of a devoted, grief-stricken son. Victor rushed toward me, grabbed my shoulders, and squeezed so hard I winced slightly in pain. His voice broke, tears welling in his eyes, a perfect performance that could fool anyone. He repeatedly asked how his mother was, what the doctors were saying, why it had all happened. I lowered my eyes, squeezed out a few tears, and, sobbing, told him how I had opened the door and found his mother in a pool of blood. As soon as I mentioned the jar of cream lying on the floor, Victor abruptly let go of me. He jumped up, breathing heavily, and began frantically fumbling in his pants pockets for his car keys. He said he needed to go home immediately to get his mother's insurance card and ID, otherwise the hospital wouldn't perform surgery. Documents at 2 a.m., while his mother was in the ICU. I lowered my head, hiding an icy smile. I knew perfectly well why he was going home. He needed to destroy the black glass jar. He needed to clean up the scene he had so carefully prepared for me. If the police or the hospital demanded a toxicology test, that jar would be his death sentence. I played the part of the obedient wife. With tears, I nodded and urged him not to waste time. Victor's silhouette disappeared around the corner of the hallway. His steps were hurried. I slipped my hand into my jacket pocket, feeling the tissue with the drop of the chemical lying quietly inside. Go home, Victor. Clean up your empty stage. An hour later, when the head of the department came out of the ICU, his face was tense. He looked at me, sighed heavily, and shook his head. The toxin has corroded the entire epidermis, the dermis, and has destroyed the muscle tissue in the patient's face and neck. Worse, the chemical's toxic fumes entered her respiratory tract, causing bronchial burns and acute heart failure. Even if we manage to save her life, she will be permanently blind, disabled, and with a disfigured face that would make even the devil flinch. Hearing those words, I slowly closed my eyes. If I had opened that jar of cream that night, if I had listened to my murderous husband, applied a thick layer to my face, and gone to sleep, then this morning, the rotting corpse in the ICU would have been me. In the darkness of the hospital corridor, I suddenly realized that this battle had only just begun, and I had to be the one to survive it. 3 days after that terrible night, my mother-in-law was still in the intensive care unit. Her body was entangled in tubes, and her face was wrapped in white bandages, leaving only 2 holes for the ventilator. A yellowish-brown fluid with a burnt smell constantly seeped through the gauze. Victor took a leave of absence from work and stayed at the hospital around the clock. In the eyes of the relatives and friends who came to visit, he was a model of a devoted son, broken by grief, to the point where his eyes were deeply sunken and his cheeks were covered in stubble. Only I knew that his exhaustion came not from the pain of losing his mother, but from the animalistic fear of a murderer waiting for the sword of justice to fall on his neck. On the morning of the 4th day, taking advantage of the fact that Victor was discussing the treatment plan with the head doctor, I left for home under the pretext of needing to get some things and make some broth. Victor couldn't stop me, but his gaze drilled into my back, sharp, full of suspicion and anxiety. He knew he had perfectly cleaned the crime scene, but the paranoid nature of a criminal wouldn't let him rest. I pushed open the metal door and entered the 3-story house, which was as quiet as a grave. The acrid chemical smell still lingered in the air, having seeped into the wood and the fabric of the curtains. I went straight up to Helen's room. As I expected, the room had been scrubbed clean. The carpet, stained with blood and foam, was gone. The floor had been washed with a strong, lemon-scented bleach. The black glass jar, the red velvet box, everything had vanished without a trace. He had destroyed the evidence flawlessly. I returned to our marital bedroom, the place where I was supposed to have died. I froze in front of the oak vanity. The memories of that morning flashed vividly in my mind. What had Victor told me? Tonight, after your shower, be sure to apply it. Go to sleep just like that. Turn off the light right away and go to bed, don't stay up. Why did the light have to be turned off? If it was a chemical that caused an immediate burn, even in the dark, I would have screamed and run to wash it off. But he told me to apply it thickly, lie down, and close my eyes. This proved that the poison had a hidden incubation period. It was meant to be absorbed slowly, paralyzing the nerve endings before it began to eat away the flesh. By the time I felt the pain, the poison would have already entered my respiratory system. Paralyzed vocal cords would have prevented me from calling for help. He had calculated everything down to the smallest detail. But something was bothering me. Victor was a psychopath with a narcissistic personality disorder. Having created the perfect murder scenario, could he really resist the pleasure of watching his masterpiece unfold? Would he have settled for just sitting in a hotel room in New Hampshire and imagining his wife silently writhing in agony? No, he definitely wanted to see it. He had to watch with his own eyes. That thought struck my brain like a bolt of lightning. A chill ran down my spine and my temples broke out in a cold sweat. I slowly raised my head, scanning the bedroom. A spacious room, decorated in a minimalist Scandinavian style. Bed, wardrobe, vanity, TV stand, everything was familiar. But if he wanted to watch, he must have hidden an eye somewhere in here, in a place with a view of the bed and the vanity. I started searching. I turned over the artificial flowers, inspected the air conditioner vents, even took our wedding photo off the wall. Nothing. I got on the floor, looked under the bed, under the wardrobe, still nothing. Time was ticking away. The clock's ticking made my heart pound with panic. Maybe I was just overthinking it? Maybe my death alone was enough for him? Just as I was about to give up and get up, my gaze accidentally fell on the white, cylindrical air purifier standing in the corner, diagonally across from the bed and the vanity. Victor had bought it 2 weeks ago, under the pretext that the air quality in Boston was poor and he was concerned about my breathing. I slowly approached the purifier. It was plugged in and humming quietly. I knelt down and began to carefully inspect every line, every ventilation hole. And there, in the very depth of the second filter, perfectly camouflaged against the black plastic, I saw it, a tiny dot, smaller than a match head. If I hadn't been changing my angle, trying to catch the reflection of the light from the window, I would have never noticed it. Holding my breath, I went to the table, took a small medical pen light, turned it on, and shone it directly at the spot. It was the lens of a micro camera. Next to the lens, a tiny red LED pulsed every 2 seconds. It was working. The camera was connected directly to the purifier's power supply and was transmitting data over Wi-Fi. My knees gave out. I sank to the hardwood floor, clamping my hands over my mouth to stifle the sobs tearing from my throat. That red eye was staring right at me, soulless and cruel. That night when he called me, he wasn't just hearing my voice. He had opened an app on his phone. He was waiting to see me open the velvet box, obediently apply the acid to my face, and then get into bed to await my death. The moment I said his mother had taken the cream to her room, he had howled in panic because Helen was not in the frame. He had lost control because his real victim had slipped out of the trap he had so eagerly wanted to enjoy. This cruelty was beyond anything human. He didn't just want to kill me and absolve himself of responsibility. He saw my death as entertainment, as a real-life snuff film he was going to savor. I stared unwaveringly at the blinking red dot. The tears of fear had long since dried, replaced by a blazing flame of hatred that was burning my soul. You want to see me suffer, Victor? You want to see me writhing in a pool of blood? Fine, I'll give you a show. I'll star in a play where you're the director, but I will write the ending. I didn't remove the camera. I left everything as it was, pretending to simply pack some things in a bag and make the bed, like a model housewife. But before I left the room, I deliberately stood right in front of the lens, looked directly into it, gave a meaningful smile with the corners of my lips, and turned away. The game was on. "Honey, I'm back," I said, returning to the hospital with a bag of things as evening fell. The ICU corridor was still steeped in cold and the smell of death. Victor was standing at the end of the hall near the stairwell, smoking a cigarette. Seeing me, he hastily extinguished the butt and smoothed his disheveled hair. I walked closer, doing my best to portray an exhausted, haggard face and a panicky fear in my downcast eyes. I knew that at home, he had watched the camera and seen me packing, but he needed to test the waters, to understand how much I knew about the cream's origin. Before entering his line of sight, I put my hand in my jacket pocket and pressed the record button on my phone's voice recorder. "I brought your things. Has Mom woken up yet? The doctors say it's very bad, Anna. I'm afraid she won't make it. Victor, how did Mom get like this? What was that cream? Why did it disfigure her face so badly? I'm so scared. What if I had put it on that night? I would be the one lying in there now." "Yes. Calm down. Don't panic." How can I calm down? This morning, I specifically looked for that black jar at home to take to the doctors to find out what poison was in it, but I couldn't find it. It was lying on the floor in Mom's room. You said your friends brought it from Switzerland. How could it turn into poison? Maybe you were tricked? Let's report it to the police. That seller must answer for Mom's life. Shut up! Are you crazy? Going to the police? My fake hysteria successfully broke through his facade of calm. He roared, his eyes widening and turning bloodshot. Quickly glancing around and making sure no one was in the corridor, he grabbed my arm and roughly dragged me into the stairwell. The heavy fire door slammed shut, locking us in a dim yellow light that reeked of cigarette butts. He pinned me against the wall, squeezing my arm with such force that I thought the bone would crack. The intelligent face of the husband I had lived with for 3 years contorted, revealing clenched jaws filled with beastly rage. Listen here. There was no Swiss cream. You will not say a word about that damned gift box to anyone, not the police, not the doctors. Got it? What are you talking about, Victor? I don't understand. How could there not have been? You gave it to me yourself that morning and told me to apply a thick layer. You wanted to kill me? I said, shut up. If I wanted to kill you, I would have slit your throat long ago. Why would I bother with these chemical tricks? The truth is, Mom got scammed. Lately, she's been watching all these online streams selling fake cosmetics, instant peel products. She went for a cheap deal, wanted to look younger, and ordered some junk online. A cream mixed with toilet bowl cleaner. She hid in her room, put it on, and got a chemical burn. That's the truth, you idiot. But the red velvet box? You gave it to me yourself. The box had a regular cream from the supermarket. You left it on the table. Mom saw the pretty jar and took it. What she did with it, I have no idea. And that jar on the floor was the fake cosmetic she bought herself. The morning the ambulance took her, I found the delivery package under her bed. I was afraid the police would make a scandal, and it would hurt my reputation, my company, so I threw everything away. You're lying. There are no such coincidences. I'm going to the police. I'll tell them about the black jar you gave me. I won't let Mom die just like that. You just try to open your mouth, and I will drag your whole family to the grave. You think the police will believe a daughter-in-law who was always fighting with her mother-in-law, or a top executive with money and connections like me? Who was home with Mom that night? Who was the only one who could have swapped the cream for acid? You. You've hated her for a long time for taking your things. You hated her, bought acid, disguised it as cream to kill her. The neighbors' cameras will prove I wasn't home. But you were there. All I need to do is pay a good lawyer and feed a story to the press, and you'll instantly become the evil, poisoning daughter-in-law. Your whole family back in Ohio won't be able to lift their heads in shame. Your father has a bad heart. Do you want him to die of disgrace? I pressed myself against the cold concrete wall, trembling like a leaf. The tears rolling from my eyes were no longer an act but a testament to unbearable resentment and rage. He had calculated everything. He had turned his failed attempt to murder his wife into a perfect trap for me. If I dared to tell the truth, he would flip the board and make me the murderer. He was confident that with his money and power, he could crush a simple girl from a small town like me. Seeing me cry and cower in fear, Victor seemed very pleased. He slowly relaxed his fingers, adjusted his collar, and his expression changed as quickly as a pancake flipped in a pan. From a fanged demon, he transformed back into a condescending, suffering husband. He raised his hand and gently wiped the tears from my cheeks. His touch made my stomach churn, but I bit my lip and stood still. Good girl. My wife is very smart. I'm sure you understand I'm doing this for our family. What happened to Mom causes me the greatest pain. I don't want our family to have problems with the law. I don't want reporters digging into our lives. Later, if the police officer comes to take a statement, just cry and say what I just told you. Mom bought fake cosmetics online herself and got a burn. I've already had the receipts and documents forged. Just be obedient. I promise. When we sort all this out, I will compensate you 1,000 times over. Understand? I understand. I'll do as you say. I won't say anything to the police. Just don't touch my parents. That's a good girl. Wash your face and come out. I'll go buy you something to eat. You must be tired. He kissed my forehead and, turning away, pushed open the stairwell door. His footsteps faded down the corridor. As soon as the metal door closed, all the panic and fear vanished from my face, replaced by a gaze as sharp as a box cutter's blade. I slowly put my hand into my jacket pocket and pressed the stop button on the recording that had been running for the last 10 minutes. I knew you wouldn't leave any traces. I knew you would use your power to pin the blame on me if I just accused you verbally. You think you're so smart, blackmailing me with my family. You're wrong, Victor. This recording won't send you to prison right now because it's not physical proof of murder, but it's the first lever. You took the bait yourself, admitting you knew about the cream and threatening me to hide the truth. Keep playing the victim. Keep thinking I'm weak prey, meekly waiting for you to devour me. I'll show you how deep a woman who has come back from the dead can dig a grave for her enemy. That same day, after I successfully played my part for Victor and answered the routine questions from the police officer by then, Victor had already smoothed things over with bribes. Presenting it all as an accident due to poor quality cosmetics, I claimed exhaustion and asked to go home to rest. Victor, of course, agreed. He needed me out of the way to quietly handle matters at the hospital and continue playing the role of the grief-stricken son. Leaving the hospital grounds, I immediately hailed a cab and went straight to MIT, not home. In my jacket pocket, the tissue with the drop of cream still lay, emitting its acrid smell through the plastic bag I had wrapped it in. This was my only hope, the only spear I could use to pierce the perfect armor of my murderous husband. I found Michael, a close high school friend who was now a graduate student in the analytical chemistry department. Michael was the only person in this city I could trust completely, not only because of our long-standing friendship, but also because he had no connection to Victor. We met in a quiet cafe off campus. When I removed the plastic and unfolded the tissue, Michael, barely leaning in to sniff it, immediately recoiled, hastily sealed it with tape, and put it in a special Ziploc bag. His face turned pale, his brows furrowed. He looked at me with a mixture of bewilderment and extreme seriousness. "Anna, where did you get this stuff? This is absolutely not a cosmetic, not an ointment, and not something that can be used on people. That smell, the smell of burnt almonds mixed with a strong ether scent. It's the reaction of fluoroacetic acid combined with solvents that break down the epidermis." I didn't understand chemistry. I only felt a heavy weight pressing on my chest. I told Michael about the horror of the previous night, about Victor's blackmail and the voice recording. After listening to me, Michael set down his coffee cup with a trembling hand. He told me to sit there and rushed off to the university lab. The 4 hours of waiting felt like 4 centuries. I sat in a corner of the cafe watching the stream of cars in the evening rain. My nerves were stretched as taut as a string. If it was just a common acid, Victor would say the seller scammed him. I needed proof that it was a purposefully synthesized poison. After 6 p.m., Michael returned, clutching printouts of a spectral analysis. There wasn't a drop of color in his face. He sat down, lowering his voice to a whisper, as if afraid we would be overheard. "Anna, you need to go to the homicide division immediately. This isn't an accident. This is a meticulously planned murder, the work of a true monster's brain." Michael spread the papers on the table, circling several complex formulas with a red pen. He explained everything to me in the most accessible language possible. The sample I had brought turned out to be a lethal cocktail, handcrafted with terrifying sophistication. The main component was not just fluoroacetic acid, a powerful poison often used for rat control, but it was mixed with dimethyl sulfoxide, or DMSO. DMSO is a solvent capable of penetrating human skin at a monstrous speed, pulling everything dissolved in it into the bloodstream. It turned a common poison into a chemical weapon absorbed through the skin. Michael's voice trembled. Whoever mixed this intentionally wanted to deceive the victim. The cream's black color and sharp smell were masked by a cheap industrial fragrance. If you had done as he said, applied a thick layer to your face, and gone to sleep, the DMSO would have dragged the poison through the epidermis, directly into your veins. At first, you would have only felt a slight coolness, due to an added local anesthetic. But just 2 hours later, as you slept soundly, the poison would have destroyed your central nervous system, causing acute respiratory failure, convulsions, and foaming at the mouth. Finally, the remaining acid would have reacted, burning your face from the inside out. As I listened, my hands and feet turned to ice. He didn't just want to kill me, he wanted me to die slowly, without regaining consciousness. And when my body was found, it would have looked like anaphylactic shock from a low-quality cosmetic, leading to necrosis. He was a biochemist. He had enough knowledge and materials to create this perfect, traceless weapon. And what's worse, Michael continued through gritted teeth. DMSO evaporates very quickly. If the jar is opened or the cream is exposed to air, the solvent will completely vanish within a few hours. The poison's molecular structure will change, leaving only a residue identical to a common industrial cleaner. He even planned his escape route. If the doctors take a skin sample from his mother for analysis now, they will conclude that she simply got a burn from a fake cream with a high concentration of acid. I sat as if turned to stone. The veil of mystery was torn away, but behind it was only a cold, iron wall of despair. He was too smart, too cunning. My voice recording only proved his threats, and Michael's lab report had no legal standing. Without the original sample from that black glass jar, the main piece of evidence he had destroyed down to the last crumb, I had nothing. I thanked Michael, asked him to keep everything secret, and to lock away the remaining sample in his lab safe. In the taxi on the way home, I pressed my head against the window. Tears flowed uncontrollably, not from fear, but from a sense of absolute powerlessness. To stand against an educated devil was like an ant trying to bite through the armor of a tank. What should I do? Going to the police now was suicide. He would file a countersuit for slander, and with such weak evidence, I would surely lose. I needed to find a motive. Why did he want to kill me with such incredible cruelty? When love is gone, people get divorced, divide assets, threaten each other. Rarely does someone choose murder, unless they are cornered by debt, and their wife becomes a life raft made of blood money. Yes, only money could turn a person into such a cold-blooded monster. The motive for murder. Those words spun in my head all night. I lay in our familiar bed, staring at the ceiling, occasionally glancing at the air purifier in the corner where the hidden camera's red eye still blinked. I had to pretend I was tossing and turning with worry for my mother-in-law's health. Sometimes I sniffled to please the sick director on the other side of the screen, while in the dark, my brain worked at its limit. The next day I took a long-term leave from work, lying that I needed to care for my critically ill mother-in-law. Victor was very pleased with my submissiveness. He gave me a stack of cash, told me to take care of his mother at the hospital, and said he needed to stop by the office to deal with some paperwork before he could relieve me. The moment I saw his Toyota Camry drive out of the gate, I immediately called a taxi and told the driver to follow him. I had lived with him for 3 years and knew his character. A man who had just orchestrated a failed murder could not calmly go to the office for a meeting. He needed to deal with the remaining evidence. As I expected, the Camry didn't head downtown where his company was located. The car drove to the suburbs, winding through abandoned cottage communities beyond the Charles River, and stopped in front of an unfinished brick house overgrown with weeds. I dismissed the taxi and hid behind a half-demolished fence about 50 yards away. The house had no gate. The grass was knee-high, a typical abandoned construction site. Victor got a large black plastic bag from the trunk, furtively looked around, and went inside. 20 minutes later, he came out, threw the bag back in the trunk, and sped off. Waiting until the car was out of sight, I tiptoed to the house. The smell of dampness and mold hit my nose. The first floor was an empty shell. Bricks and cement remnants were scattered everywhere. But in the farthest corner, under the stairs, was a solid metal door with no keyhole. It was an electronic lock with a fingerprint scanner. I pressed my ear to the cold metal. Not a sound. Suddenly, I sniffed the air. A slight draft from under the door carried that familiar, nauseatingly acrid smell of burnt almonds, the smell of DMSO and acid. My heart hammered as if it would leap from my chest. This was it. This was the devil's basement, the place where he had personally mixed that deadly cream. The place where he had nurtured the plan to peel the skin from my face. And that black bag he carried out, he was probably going to dump the trash, including that damned glass jar, at some landfill or in the river. It was impossible to get inside. I backed away, quickly photographed the house, saved the geolocation, and returned to the hospital. On the way back, I couldn't stop thinking. He has a secret lab. He's using expensive chemicals to create poison. What could be worth such expense and risk? Back at the hospital while changing, I overheard 2 nurses at their station talking. That Helen's family seems well off, but they're such cheapskates. She has severe necrosis, needs skin grafts, massive doses of antibiotics. The bill is running into thousands of dollars a day. Yesterday, I told the son to make a down payment. He winced, tried to pay by card for a long time, and several of his cards were declined. I froze. Cards declined. Victor was a senior manager. His salary was no less than $300,000. The house was inherited from his mother, no mortgage. We didn't spend extravagantly. How was it possible that he couldn't afford to pay for his own mother's treatment? A bad feeling flared up in me. I remembered Victor often sitting at the computer late at night. The moment I walked in, he would startle and slam the laptop shut. Constant phone calls on the balcony whispered conversations. I had thought he had a mistress. But no, these symptoms were exactly like my cousin's back in Ohio. Gambling addiction, sports betting. That evening, while Victor was dozing in a chair in the hospital corridor, exhausted, I carefully pulled his spare phone from his jacket pocket, the one he used for work chats and banking. I had known his password for a long time but had never touched it. With trembling hands, I entered the PIN. A stream of debt collection messages immediately caught my eye. Not from official banks, but from payday lenders and loan sharks. Messages from burner numbers, full of gangster slang, threats of murder and violence. The total debt was not a few $100,000, but collectively amounted to nearly $1 million. He was gambling on international sports, getting into margin trading with crypto, and had been wiped out. He had sold his soul to the devil trying to win it back, but only sank deeper. I scrolled down to his email. There, among dozens of spam messages, was one that made me freeze. Subject: Confirmation of life insurance policy issuance. Policyholder: Victor. Insured person: Anna, that is, me. Payout in case of death by accident or domestic poisoning: $2 million. The sole beneficiary: Victor. Date of issue: exactly 1 month ago. $2 million. My life. Our 3 years of marriage were valued by him at $2 million to cover his debts. All the pieces of the puzzle fell into place. He needed me to die. To die from a regrettable household accident, from poor quality cosmetics, so he could legally claim the huge insurance payout. His mother, because of her bottomless greed, had accidentally saved my life, destroying his perfect plan. The motive was clear, the lab was found. Now it was time to make this monster pay. The following 3 days passed in a suffocating, incredibly tense atmosphere. My mother-in-law was still in a coma after her first skin graft surgery. The doctor said the facial tissues were too severely damaged. They had to take skin from her thigh, but the risk of infection was still critical. Victor and I shared watch duties. In public, he remained the caring husband and exhausted son. But when we were alone in the corridor, I would catch his icy, waiting gazes on me. He was assessing how much I knew. In the afternoon, I brought a thermos of broth to the hospital. Victor was sitting hunched on a metal bench outside the ICU. Dark circles were etched under his eyes, and stubble covered his face. Seeing me, he put on his usual show, clutching his head in his hands, ruffling his hair, and sighing heavily, conveying the utmost despair. Anna, the doctor just called me in. Mom's condition is very bad. Her lungs are weak. The skin is being rejected. If this continues, the bills will grow to astronomical sums. I just don't know where to get the money. I placed the thermos on the bench. My gaze was fixed directly on the top of his head. A slight smile touched my lips, but my voice sounded just as concerned. How can that be, Victor? You're a director. You have a good salary. We should have a few $100,000 in our accounts. Besides, you said a big quarterly bonus was expected at the company. Why are you saying there's no money to pay? I invested our savings in a friend's startup. I can't withdraw it now without losing half. And the company froze bonuses until the end of the year. I'm at my wit's end. Maybe you could go to Ohio? Ask your parents to mortgage their property to the bank, borrow a couple $100,000 for me to pull Mom out of this? I held my breath, clenching my teeth tightly. He owed loan sharks nearly $1 million. He couldn't pay. He planned to kill me for the insurance money. That failed. And now he had the audacity to try to deprive my parents of their only home, earned with their blood, sweat, and tears. Truly, an animal without a shred of conscience. Are you kidding, Victor? That land is my family's inheritance. My parents have lived there their whole lives. If we mortgage it for your mother and can't repay the debt, my parents will be on the street. You're her only son. Why don't you sell our townhouse or your car to pay for the treatment? Why are you reaching for my parents' land? The house is in Mom's name. How can I sell it while she's in a coma? And I've already put the car up as collateral for the business. You're her daughter-in-law, Mom is on her deathbed, and you're sparing a piece of dirt in your village? Do you want me to start a scene right now and tell everyone that you're the one who gave Mom that fake acid? I pretended to recoil, clutching my chest. Tears welled in my eyes. You're threatening me again. You forgot that I already agreed to give the police the statement you wanted. I took the shame, agreed to their interrogations. And now you want to corner me? I don't grudge the money for your mother, but my family is poor. You know that. I have an idea. Last month, you said you bought an expensive life insurance policy for me. An exclusive protection package. An agent mistakenly called me a couple of weeks ago to confirm the details. I didn't get a chance to ask you about it before this tragedy with Mom happened. Since we're in such a desperate situation, maybe you can cancel that policy and take the premium to pay for the treatment. After all, I didn't die from chemical poisoning. So why wait for that $2 million? The hospital corridor seemed to freeze over. The beep of the heart monitor from the ward sounded deafening. Victor looked at me. There was no more pretense in his gaze. No mask of a virtuous husband. It was the look of a predator who realized his prey had not only escaped the trap but was standing right in front of him, mocking him. He exhaled noisily. His jaw muscles worked. He understood that I knew too much. The accident with the cream was no longer just an accident to me. I had peered into the blackest, filthiest depths of his soul. What do you know? What are you trying to do? I don't know anything, and I'm not trying to do anything. I'm a simple girl from a small town. How can I compete with a brilliant biochemist like you? I'm just looking for a way to pay for your mother's treatment. If you don't want to sell the car or cancel the insurance, you decide. I'm tired. I'm going home to rest. I'll bring broth tomorrow. I turned and walked away without waiting for an answer. My back was covered in a cold sweat, but my steps were firm. This provocation was extremely dangerous. I was balancing on the edge of life and death. A cornered beast will bite. But I had to do it. I had to force him to make the second move. And this time, I already had a steel cage ready. Only by catching him in the act would I get the ironclad evidence to send him to prison and make him pay for what he did to me and to the woman in the ICU. The game of cat and mouse had officially reversed. That provocation in the hospital corridor finally drew the line between Victor and me. He knew I was aware of the $2 million insurance policy. I knew he was the creator of the acid. Under one roof, we were no longer husband and wife. We were two predators, waiting for the moment to tear into each other's throats. For the next week, Victor, under the pretext of caring for his mother, barely came home. In reality, he was scared. He didn't know what other cards I had up my sleeve and didn't risk attacking now, while the police were still keeping the case of Helen's burn under observation. I used this precious time to set my nets. First, I hired a technician to install 3 hidden cameras, in the living room, the kitchen, and the hallway. I didn't touch Victor's camera with the red eye in the bedroom, continuing to play the role of the obedient victim. Perhaps it would have all remained a psychological war if, on one stormy night, I hadn't received a frightening anonymous message. It was 2 a.m. I was dozing when my phone screen lit up. An SMS from a virtual number. I rubbed my eyes and opened it. There was no text, only a photograph. A photo of a young woman with long dark hair in a beautiful dress. But what made me almost drop the phone in horror was her face. The right half was monstrously deformed. Withered skin, purplish-gray scars. Exactly like the aftermath of a brutal acid attack. The woman's eyes stared into the lens with such doom, pain, and inexpressible longing that my blood ran cold. I shot up, my back drenched in cold sweat. Whose number was this? Who was this woman? Why was this sent to me now? Before I could compose myself, a second message arrived. Brief, icy. Don't become her. Run from him while you can. I hastily called the number back, but only heard the automated voice of an answering machine. The subscriber is unavailable. Curiosity and a dark premonition made me save the photo and use a reverse image search. The internet remembers everything. Scrolling through the results, I found a short article in a local newspaper from 6 years ago. The headline made me freeze. Mysterious suicide of chemistry grad student. Doused face with acid and jumped from bridge due to depression. I devoured the text. The victim's name was Catherine, 25 years old. She was an outstanding master's student at MIT. The article said that due to work-related stress, she had fallen into a deep depression, poured concentrated acid on herself, but survived. 6 months later, unable to bear the disfigurement, she jumped from a bridge, leaving a suicide note. Below the article was a portrait of her before the tragedy. I immediately recognized her as the woman from the anonymous photo. But what made my blood freeze was at the very end of the text. The deceased's family declined to comment. It is known that before the acid incident, the woman was in a serious relationship and preparing for marriage with her colleague from the lab, Victor. My world spun. 6 years ago, Victor had a fiancée. Her face was destroyed by acid, and then she killed herself. 6 years later, his wife, me, had nearly become the victim of a complex acid compound disguised as a cosmetic. He was a biochemist. Kate was also a chemist, a smart, educated woman. Why would she choose such an unbearably painful, barbaric way to commit suicide? Unless she didn't pour it on herself. Unless she became a victim of the same devil with the face of an intellectual. But if Kate had been dead for 6 years, who sent me the message tonight? I stared at the phone screen. The darkness in the room seemed to thicken, ready to swallow me. Victor wasn't just a gambler wanting to kill his wife for insurance money. He could be a serial killer whose signature move was to destroy the faces of the women who loved him with chemicals. I had slept in the same bed with a monster for 3 years. A monster who not only killed but enjoyed the agony of his victims. Remembering the hidden camera in the air purifier, I felt a powerful wave of nausea. I had to save myself. And not just myself. I had to get to the bottom of the truth about Kate's death and, once and for all, deliver this monster into the hands of justice. The determination to rip the mask off Victor boiled within me with new force. I understood that I couldn't just sit and wait for his next move. I needed physical evidence. Somewhere in this house, he kept his dirtiest secrets. The basement in the abandoned house was his workshop, but he wouldn't leave such important things without round-the-clock supervision. My sole target became his personal office on the 3rd floor. Since our wedding, that room had been a forbidden zone for me. Victor cited strict corporate secrecy, always locked the door, and carried the only key with him. But he forgot one thing. I was his wife, and I had lived in this house long enough to learn all his habits. The next morning, when Victor announced he would spend the whole day at the hospital arranging his mother's transfer to the plastic surgery department, I sprang into action. I called a locksmith, lying that the lock was jammed and important documents were inside. It took the expert less than 15 minutes to crack the expensive electronic lock. After paying and seeing him off, I took a deep breath and stepped into the beast's lair. The curtains in the office were always drawn tight. The air smelled of damp oak and Victor's cologne. In the corner, under a large abstract painting, was an electronic safe built into the wall. I tried everything. His birthday, our wedding date, his phone number. Each time, a red error light flashed. One last attempt remained before the alarm, directly connected to his phone, would go off. I was covered in a cold sweat. My hand trembled. What was the password? What combination of numbers would such a cold-blooded narcissist choose to protect his greatest secrets? Certainly not mine or his mother's. Narcissists are obsessed only with their own achievements, their greatest, most cruel achievements. I remembered yesterday's article about Catherine's death. The publication date was November 14th. Clenching my teeth, I slowly typed 1411 on the keypad. A beep, a click. The indicator turned green. The heavy steel bolts retracted. The safe was open. I sank to the floor, pulling out all the contents into the light. The first things that caught my eye were stacks of payday loan agreements, exactly as in his email. But beneath these blood-soaked debt notes lay an exquisitely carved wooden box. Opening it, I nearly screamed in horror. Inside, the box was divided into compartments lined with black velvet. In the first lay a lock of long, dark hair, carelessly tied with a dark red ribbon. Next to the lock was a small, yellowed fingernail, carefully sealed in a Ziploc bag. In the second compartment was a tarnished silver engagement ring, and at the very bottom lay Polaroid pictures of a woman. I recognized her. It was Catherine. In the photos, she was smiling happily. But the most painful part was that all these photos were scribbled over with a red pen. The woman's face was shaded with such fury that the paper was torn in places. These were his trophies. Serial killer psychopaths often keep a part of the victim's body or a personal item to relish the feeling of victory. Victor had personally disfigured Kate, driven her to suicide, and then hidden her lock of hair and fingernail in his safe, like a medal for bravery. My hands trembled as I lifted the bottom of the box. In the last compartment lay 3 items that sent a deathly chill through me. Our marriage certificate, a copy of my $2 million life insurance policy, and a small, thumb-sized glass vial, inside which a grayish liquid bubbled. A liquid identical to the one in the Swiss cream. He had saved some of the deadly poison. He had placed the marriage certificate, the insurance policy, and this poison together. The message was crystal clear. I was his second masterpiece in the making. He had thought of everything. If the cream plan failed, he had a backup option to finish me off, collect the $2 million, and place my lock of hair in this sick box. I took out my phone and photographed all the contents of the safe, from Kate's lock of hair and the mutilated photos to the vial of acid. I didn't take anything. I knew he was too cunning. The slightest shift and he would know. After taking the pictures, I arranged everything in perfect order, slammed the safe door shut, and locked the office, as if I had never been there. When I came downstairs, my knees were still trembling, but my gaze was as cold as ice. Victor, you have your trophies, and I have my weapon. It's time to open the cage, throw in a piece of fresh meat, and lure this devil into the light. He needed money, and he was in a hurry to tie up loose ends. Helen had been in the hospital for 3 weeks. The bills had surpassed hundreds of thousands. The loan sharks wouldn't leave him alone. He couldn't wait any longer. He had to kill me at any cost for the insurance money. Knowing this, I decided to bait him. I would create the perfect breach, the perfect opportunity, to force him to make the decisive blow. And this time, the 3 hidden cameras I had installed would become steel witnesses to his crime. I called Victor myself. My voice was soft and sweet, like that of a perfect wife, unsuspecting of the impending storm. "Victor, you're so tired at the hospital. You've gotten so thin. Ask for some time off from the doctors today. Come home, we'll have dinner together. I've made a hot cream of mushroom soup. I want you to eat properly. And I'm so scared being home alone." Hearing the word scared, Victor froze for a second on the other end of the line, then replied in his usual falsely warm tone. "All right, I'll ask the nurses to look after Mom and I'll come. I've missed your cooking too." I hung up, smirking with contempt. Missed my cooking, or thirsting for my death. I set the table in the living room. On a tray were 3 bowls of steaming soup. Why 3? Because I knew a paranoid man like him would never eat what I served him personally. If he was planning to poison me, he would suspect me too. Around 7 p.m., the lock clicked. Victor entered, looking exhausted, but his eyes, sharp as a razor, scanned the house like a radar. I bustled over, took his briefcase, and sat him down at the table. "Eat while it's hot. I also made that chicken dish you love. And for the soup, help yourself." Victor lazily picked at his food, occasionally casting wary glances at me. Dinner proceeded in a stuffy atmosphere of empty, meaningless conversation. When it was time for the soup, I brought the tray with the 3 bowls. I took one of them and calmly ate a spoonful right in front of him. Then I pushed one bowl towards him and placed the remaining one next to me. "Eat." I spent a long time on it. Victor watched me eat. His vigilance relaxed a little. He picked up his spoon. At that exact moment, I dramatically clutched my stomach and doubled over. "Oh, my stomach is cramping. That orange juice with ice was probably a bad idea. You go ahead and eat. I'll be just a minute." I jumped up, leaving my half-eaten bowl on the table, ran into the guest bathroom on the first floor, and slammed the door. But I wasn't going to the toilet. I pulled out my phone and opened the app streaming video from the micro camera hidden in a vase by the TV. The lens was aimed directly at the dining table. On the screen, every one of Victor's gestures was as clear as day. As soon as the bathroom door closed, the image of the kind husband vanished. He spat the soup back into his bowl, stared intently at my bowl, then gave the house a suspicious glance. Very quickly, he put his hand into his pants pocket and pulled out that tiny glass vial I had seen in his safe. The gray liquid sloshed inside. His hand didn't even tremble. With a practiced motion, he unscrewed the cap and dripped exactly 3 drops of the deadly poison into my bowl. The liquid touched the surface of the soup, foamed slightly, and completely dissolved, leaving no color or smell. He put the vial back in his pocket, took my spoon, stirred my soup thoroughly, and then leaned back in his chair, jiggling his leg. A chilling, sinister smirk played on his lips. My heart was pounding, and tears of rage blurred the screen. Here was the proof. A close-up. Clear, irrefutable video of this intellectual poisoning my food. I saved the clip and immediately sent a copy to a secure cloud storage. After splashing my face with cold water and taking 3 deep breaths, I flushed the toilet and walked out, rubbing my stomach. Victor was on his phone, but seeing me, he looked up with cloying concern. "Are you feeling better? A sensitive stomach can act up like that. Go on, finish your soup, get your strength up, it's a shame to waste it." I looked him straight in the eye and walked to the table. I took the poisoned bowl and stirred it lightly with the spoon. He stared at me without blinking, swallowing hard. His pupils dilated slightly in anticipation of the moment I would bring the spoon to my mouth. I slowly raised the spoon to my lips, but suddenly froze and wrinkled my nose. "Ugh, what's that awful smell, Victor?" I grimaced theatrically. "It smells like something rotten. Like rat poison or something." Victor flinched. All the color drained from his face. "What smell?" "My soup smells fine. Your senses must be off after your stomachache." "No, the smell is terrible. If you don't believe me, smell it yourself." With those words, I abruptly, with all my might, flung the entire bowl of poisoned soup directly into Victor's face and chest. The sticky broth, mixed with chemicals, splattered everywhere. Victor let out a blood-curdling scream, shot up as if stung, and clutched his face with his hands, thrashing wildly like a monkey scalded with boiling water. He knew perfectly well how terrifying DMSO mixed with that acid was. One drop was enough for the skin to start peeling off. He bolted headlong into the bathroom, frantically turning the faucet. The sound of water mixed with his furious growls and foul curses. I stood outside, arms crossed over my chest, an icy smile on my face as I watched the pathetic sight of the man who had just tried to take my life. Wash yourself well, my love. That soup won't make your skin rot. You only added 3 drops. But that is my official declaration of war. The performance is over. Now, the real, bloody battle begins. The sound of water in the bathroom finally stopped. Victor emerged. His face was red from furious scrubbing. Wet hair stuck to his forehead. Water dripped from his shirt onto the floor. The panic from the fear of being burned had passed. Now it was replaced by a black, primal rage, burning in his bloodshot eyes. He was no longer acting. The mask of the righteous man had been brutally torn off by a bowl of soup. He lunged at me like a hungry beast, raising his huge hand to deliver a crushing slap. But I was ready. I took a sharp step back and grabbed the sharp kitchen knife I had left on the table beforehand, pointing the blade directly at him. Take one more step, and I'll cut your throat. I didn't scream. My voice was icy, sharp, and filled with murderous intent. A woman who had been 1 foot in the grave had nothing left to fear. Victor froze. The tip of the knife was inches from his Adam's apple. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving, his jaws grinding. He realized that the weak, small-town girl who had endured everything for 3 years was dead. In front of him stood an enemy, ready to fight to the death to survive. You know everything? He hissed through his teeth, his voice raspy. What exactly? About the jar of Swiss cream you wanted to burn my face off with for a $2 million insurance policy? About your basement in the abandoned house across the river? About the safe with the password 1411, where you keep Kate's hair and her mutilated photos? Or about how you just dripped 3 drops of poison into my soup? Each of my phrases fell on him like a granite slab. Victor's face changed from red to deathly pale. His pupils constricted, and his hands hung limply, trembling. He hadn't expected me to dig so deep. The vilest, dirtiest secrets he had buried in the dark for years were being ruthlessly dragged into the light right here, in our living room. You bitch! You went through my things! Did you go to the police? His madness took over again. He tried to lunge at me to knock the knife away. Think about it, I sneered, not moving the blade an inch. If I had already gone to the police, would you be standing here roaring at me? All the photos, recordings, and the video of you poisoning me are uploaded to the cloud. If I don't cancel the automatic sending in the next 24 hours, it all goes to the investigators and to Kate's family. Want to kill me right now? Go ahead. A life for a life. My parents will lose a daughter, and you'll rot in a maximum security prison, remembered as a vile maniac. My firmness and the deadly stakes of my gamble broke his momentum. He was a narcissist, terribly proud and terrified of losing everything. He had calculated everything to kill without a trace. But with all his cards laid bare and facing prison, he faltered. He backed away, clutching his head, and began to pace the living room like a caged animal. At that moment, his phone rang. He flinched, pulled it out, looked at the screen, and his face grew even darker. He declined the call, but a message immediately came through. He scanned it and collapsed onto the sofa, head in his hands. I guessed it was the loan sharks again. The deadline had arrived, and his $2 million golden goose was standing before him with a knife. Suddenly, my phone rang too. The hospital's number. My heart leaped. I took a step back, maintaining my distance, and put the call on speaker with my left hand. Hello, is this the relative of Helen? Please come immediately. The patient has regained consciousness, but she's in a panic, constantly screaming and demanding her son. We can't keep sedating her. I looked at Victor. He had also clearly heard the nurse's words. His mother was awake. Her panic wasn't just from pain. She might have vaguely understood some monstrous truth about that night. I hung up and nodded towards the door. Let's go, my love. Mommy's calling. A devoted son can't be absent at a time like this. We drove to the hospital in separate cars. On the way, 1,000 theories swirled in my head. Why was Helen so desperately calling for Victor? What did she know? Approaching the ICU room, through the glass, I saw Helen thrashing on the bed, despite her arms being tied down with medical restraints. The white bandages on her head were soaked with blood. Her eyes were completely destroyed. Only 2 black hollows remained. But upon hearing Victor's footsteps as he entered, she suddenly stopped thrashing, and her stiff neck snapped towards the sound. And then, from her mutilated mouth, came a hoarse, piercing sound, like a demon's wail, that penetrated even the soundproof walls. You bastard. You wanted to kill your wife, and you destroyed me. Your cream, you did this on purpose. Give me back my eyes, give me back my face. This is payback. Kate has come for me. Kate has come for revenge. The hospital corridor seemed to turn to stone. Nurses froze with their mouths open. An icy chill ran down my spine. That night, while the acid was eating away at her flesh, Helen must have heard Victor's panicked screams on the phone when he thought I was dead. Or perhaps she remembered the strangeness of the Swiss cream. And she mentioned Kate. How did she know Kate? Was this mother an accomplice in the crime from years ago? Victor stood as if rooted to the spot, white as a sheet of paper. He realized the truth wasn't just in my hands. Even his own mother had become a witness against him. He looked at her without a drop of pity or remorse. I saw only a bottomless coldness and the cruel calculation in the eyes of a cornered criminal. He wouldn't leave it like this. He would pull the plug on his own mother to get rid of the threat. I couldn't let him kill her now. Helen was a greedy, cruel woman, but right now, she was a priceless living witness to his crimes, both present and past. If she died, Victor would cover it all up again. I urgently called the doctor on duty, asked for a strong sedative for her, and, citing severe property disputes in the family, demanded restricted visitation, including for her own son, except when I accompanied him. Victor stood behind the glass. His gaze bored into my back, but he didn't dare make a scene. He was afraid his mother's ravings would reach the wrong ears. He turned and left, leaving me on watch. But I knew his silence was more terrifying than any scream. He was preparing another, even more brutal plan. I had to act first. At dawn, returning from my watch, I found that anonymous number. With a new SIM card, I sent a message. I am Anna, Victor's wife. I know the whole truth about the acid and Kate's death. Let's meet. We have a common enemy. 10 minutes later, a reply came with a location. A deserted cafe in the back streets of downtown Boston at 9:00 a.m. A young man in his late 20s, wearing a dark jacket with a cap pulled down over his eyes, met me. As soon as he sat down, he pulled a folder of documents from his backpack and slid it towards me. Hatred burned in his eyes. I'm Alex, Kate's brother. I'm the one who sent you the photo. I've been watching that bastard for 6 years. And I've been watching you too, since your wedding. When the ambulance took that old hag away, I knew he was up to his old tricks. The fact that you're still alive is a miracle. I looked at the documents. Kate's medical records, preliminary police reports, and a couple of burnt pages from a diary. My sister didn't kill herself, Alex gritted out. She was full of life. She was going to study abroad. She found out Victor stole her research to sell to a competitor to pay off his debts. They had a huge fight. That night, he gave her a glass of juice, and she fell asleep. When she woke up, her face was already destroyed by acid. He staged it as a suicide due to depression. The police didn't find his fingerprints. There were no cameras in her apartment. He had an ironclad alibi. He was supposedly on duty at the lab. The case was closed as a suicide. A chill ran through me. The scenario was painfully familiar. Drug them, poison them with complex chemistry without a trace, create an alibi. He had repeated the pattern with me. Only this time he used DMSO so the poison would be absorbed on its own. And the jump from the bridge? I asked, my voice trembling. Alex slammed his fist on the table. Tears welled in his eyes. That was his doing too. My sister was broken, but she wasn't giving up. She was secretly gathering evidence of his theft. He got scared, drugged her with sleeping pills again, carried her to the bridge himself, and threw her into the river, leaving a fake note. And Helen, his mother, she's the one who deleted the security camera footage from their building that night. For 6 years, our family has been seeking justice, but there was no evidence, and he paid his way out of it. That monster continued to live, got married, got a promotion. Everything fell into place. Helen was no innocent lamb. She was an accomplice to murder. That's why, in her delirium, she screamed that Kate had come for revenge. Karma had caught up with her. Her taking the cream that night was direct retribution for her past cruelty. I took out my phone and showed Alex all the materials I had gathered. Michael's analysis results, the photo of the safe with his sister's hair, and the video of Victor putting poison in my soup. Seeing the mutilated photos of his sister, Alex broke down, dropping his head onto the table. I gently patted his shoulder. My voice was firm and cold. Alex, you're not alone anymore. We have direct evidence, but if we just hand it over now, with his connections, he could flee the country or hire the best lawyers. We need to catch him in the act, corner him so that he confesses everything himself. Are you ready to play this out in the open? Alex raised his head, wiping away his tears. An unyielding determination burned in his eyes. Tell me what to do. I'm ready to trade my life for justice for my sister. We left the cafe and went straight to the Boston Police headquarters, not to a local precinct that Victor could buy off. For a series of sophisticated murders, multi-million-dollar debts, and insurance fraud, we needed top-level investigators. An experienced captain listened to our story, his brow furrowed. At first, it sounded like a thriller script, but when I laid the flash drive with all the evidence on his desk, the spectral analysis, audio recordings, photos from the safe, and most importantly, the HD video of Victor poisoning my soup, the atmosphere in the office changed. Anna, you are an incredibly brave and intelligent woman, the captain said. But you're playing with fire. A serial killer, an expert in chemistry, cornered by debt. His reaction is unpredictable. With this evidence, we can arrest him right now for attempted murder. No, Captain, I replied firmly. If you arrest him for the soup, he'll get a sentence for attempted murder or aggravated assault. I didn't drink the poison. He'll hire lawyers and be out on parole in a few years. And proving Kate's death after 6 years with circumstantial evidence is almost impossible. I want him to answer for everything. I will go back to the house. I will make him confess to Kate's murder and to creating the acid. I need you to set up surveillance and catch him in the act when he tries to kill me as an unwanted witness. After a brief consultation, the police agreed. They gave me a micro camera with a transmitter, disguised as a button on my jacket. The signal went to a SWAT van parked 200 yards from my house. The team would be ready. On my signal, they would breach the door in 15 seconds. That evening, I returned to our 3-story house. A storm was gathering. The wind howled in the treetops, the perfect backdrop for a bloody finale. Victor's car was in the garage. I opened the door with my key. The house was dark. He was sitting in a leather armchair with his back to me, holding a glass of wine as red as blood. A flash of lightning illuminated his crazed, gaunt face. Seeing me, he didn't flinch. He slowly turned, setting down the glass. His eyes held no more pretense. No fear of exposure, only a pure, animalistic thirst for blood. You're back, he said coldly. And where have you been all day, my dear wife? Why weren't you at the hospital? I threw my bag on the table, walked over, and stood opposite him. I was meeting with Alex, Kate's brother, and I just came from the police department. My words were like a match thrown into a powder keg. Victor shot up, knocking the wine glass to the floor. It shattered into 1,000 pieces. He clenched his teeth, his chest heaving. Before he could open his mouth, I delivered the final blow. Surprise? Yes, I know everything, Victor. How you stole her research, drugged her, doused her with acid, and threw her off a bridge. And I know about your cream with DMSO that you wanted to peel my skin off with for a $2 million insurance policy. You're a monster, a pathetic loser who lives off the lives of the women who love him. Shut up, he roared, and the sound echoed through the house. Rage and a trampled ego had robbed him of his sanity. He no longer needed to pretend. Yes, I did it. So what? That bitch Kate threatened to expose me to the committee. And you deserved it too. I fed you, clothed you for 3 years. Now that I'm broke, you should have sacrificed your pathetic little soul to save me. You're all stupid women. You think I'm afraid of your police? Tonight, I'm going to take your life. Leave the country, and no one will do a thing to me. With those words, he pulled a gleaming hunting knife from behind his back. He was ready to end the show. The game was over. The confession was recorded. I raised my hand and squeezed the button on my chest. I'm not going to die, Victor. You've lost. I took a step back and screamed at the top of my lungs. Act now! My scream was drowned out by a clap of thunder. In that same split second, I saw Victor's pupils constrict to a pinpoint. A killer's instinct told him something was wrong. His gaze fell on the protruding button on my jacket. He understood everything. The police outside were listening to his confession. You bitch! You set me up, he roared inhumanly. He violently kicked the heavy oak table, which slammed into my knees, causing me to stumble. 15 seconds. That's how long the SWAT team needed. 15 seconds is an instant. But in a fight to the death with an armed maniac, it's an eternity. Victor lunged at me. The knife flashed in the lightning, aimed straight for my chest. I dodged and fell to the carpet. The blade sank into the sofa's upholstery right where I had been standing, with a gruesome sound of tearing fabric. "The police won't make it in time," he growled, pulling the knife out. I couldn't get up in time, my hand fumbling on the floor for a large shard from the broken glass. As he lunged again, I drove the shard into his calf with all my strength. "Arg!" Victor howled. The glass pierced his pants and sank deep into the muscle. Blood gushed out. The pain made him lose his balance, and the knife's blow came at an angle, grazing my left forearm. An icy coldness was replaced by a searing pain as my sleeve soaked with blood. I bit my lip, kicked him hard in the stomach, sending him backward, and scrambled to my feet. The front door was locked. The only way was to the kitchen, where it was cramped and there were more objects for defense. I managed to reach the kitchen, but I didn't have time to grab a cleaver. Victor caught up to me. Ignoring the blood streaming from his leg, he grabbed a fistful of my hair at the nape of my neck and yanked with such force I thought he would scalp me. I was thrown backward. "You nurtured a snake. Did you think I would give up so easily?" He pressed me against his heaving chest. The smell of sour sweat and blood hit my nose. With his left hand, he tossed the knife aside. He didn't need it anymore. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the same vial of poison. 5, 6, 7 seconds. You know how Kate screamed when this melted her face? I had to gag her so the neighbors wouldn't hear. Her skin ran like a candle. "Now you're going to try it yourself. I'm going to rip that lying mask off you. Let the police identify who you are later." He was completely insane. His wild laughter echoed through the kitchen. He flipped open the cap, and the acrid, nauseating smell of acid hit my nose. It was less than a foot from my face. I struggled desperately, kicking the cabinets, scratching his hand, but the grip of a grown man fighting for his life was like steel. 9, 10 seconds. If that hits me, I'll be blind. My skin will melt like Helen's. Terror washed over me, but it also shot a massive dose of adrenaline into my blood. In a last, desperate effort, I stopped flailing my arms, tensed my neck, threw my head back, and sank my teeth into the forearm that was choking me. I bit through the flesh to the blood. "Bitch!" he roared in pain and instinctively loosened his grip. His left hand holding the vial jerked, and several drops of the deadly acid splashed onto the back of his own hand. A hiss erupted. Victor's skin instantly turned white, then crimson, and acrid smoke began to rise. The pain was so unbearable that he dropped the vial. The glass shattered on the tile floor. The liquid spread, foaming and eating away at the grout. 12, 13 seconds. Breaking free, I collapsed to the floor and rolled away from the smoking puddle. Victor fell to his knees, clutching his burning hand and spewing filthy curses. But his red eyes still looked at me with murderous malice. He grabbed a kitchen knife from the counter and lunged at me again. I snatched a heavy wooden cutting board and held it up like a shield. 14 seconds. Boom! A deafening explosion thundered from the living room. The massive oak door, the pride of Victor's family, splintered from a SWAT team's directed charge. The hinges were torn off, and the door slammed into the wall. "Police! Drop the weapon. SWAT on site." Thunderous voices filled the house. Blinding lights from tactical flashlights cut through the darkness and flooded the kitchen. 4 officers in heavy body armor with assault rifles burst in. Victor froze with the knife raised. Blinded and crazed, he didn't drop the knife but tried to take a step towards me. Twack! A shot rang out. A rubber bullet hit him squarely in the forearm. Victor howled. The knife flew from his hand and clattered against a cabinet. Less than a second later, 2 officers were on him, tackling him to the floor and pinning him with a knee to his back. A dry click of metal, and cold handcuffs snapped around the murderer's wrists. "Victor, you are under arrest. You have the right to remain silent," the captain who entered announced loudly and harshly, shattering the last illusions of the sophisticated monster. Victor was pressed face down to the floor, right next to the smoking puddle of acid. Dust from the blasted door hung in the air. He struggled to turn his head and looked at me. His eyes no longer held arrogance or cruelty, only pathetic, vile, whimpering fear. He began to cry crocodile tears, his face contorting. Annie, save me, please. I made a mistake. Forgive me," he whined, his behavior shifting with such cowardice it made me sick. A female officer helped me up. Blood dripped from the wound on my arm. My body was shaking from the adrenaline crash, but I stood straight. I looked down at the man groveling at my feet, the man with whom I had shared a bed, who had dug my grave under the guise of love. "The law will forgive you after you've paid for Kate's life, for your mother's eyes, and for everything else. Go to hell and repent there, Victor. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, which reeked of acid and lies. The storm outside had subsided. The wind, rushing in through the shattered doorway, brought a cool freshness, washing away the filth of this prison house. I had survived. My battle was over. That terrifying night ended with the wail of police sirens. Flashing lights illuminated the old trees of the upscale neighborhood. Neighbors poured out into the street, whispering and pointing at the successful biochemist, the pride of their street, now being led to a police van in handcuffs, with torn clothes and a bandaged, burned hand. I sat in an ambulance while my wound was being treated. Watching the police van disappear into the darkness, I took a deep breath. The weight that had been crushing me for 3 years had finally lifted. The next day, investigators conducted searches. As I had told them, they found a real laboratory in the basement of the abandoned house canisters of reagents, poison recipes, and empty vials of the substance he had used to kill Kate 6 years ago. The safe was also opened. When the lock of hair, the fingernail, the ring, and the mutilated photos were brought into the light, even the investigators shuddered. Victor wasn't just a murderer driven by debt. He was a psychopath who turned the suffering of the women who loved him into trophies. His gambling debts and money transfers also surfaced. The police busted the loan shark syndicate that had been threatening him. The insurance company immediately voided the $2 million policy. All his paths to enrichment through blood were cut off. Pinned against the wall by ironclad evidence, video, audio, chemicals, and his own confession recorded on a hidden camera, Victor broke. On the 3rd day in county jail, he confessed to everything. The case became a national sensation. The press was filled with headlines about the bloody chemist. But in this chain of karma, there was one more person who paid a price more terrible than death: Helen. A month later, she was transferred from the ICU to a regular ward. She survived, but the poison that had reached her central nervous system had permanently paralyzed the right side of her body. I decided to visit her one last time, not out of pity, but to find closure. I entered the hospital room, which smelled of bleach. Helen's face, which she had been so proud of, had become a mess of scars. Her blind, milky eyes stared at the ceiling. Hearing the click of my heels, she flinched and made a hoarse sound. Victor? I stood calmly at the foot of her bed. Victor isn't coming. He's in jail, awaiting trial, where he'll get a life sentence. Her body jerked as if from an electric shock. With her good hand, she clutched the sheet and began to sob. Tears flowed from her blind eyes. You bitch! You put my son in jail! His own cruelty put him there, I interrupted coldly. And your greed turned him into a monster. 6 years ago, you erased the camera footage to cover up his murder. You thought someone else's life was trash. If you hadn't taken that cream, I would be lying here now. But God sees everything. You opened the poison created by your own son. You experienced the same pain that Kate did. Now you will live out your days in darkness as a disabled person, knowing that your only son will rot in a maximum security prison. This is your karma. I turned and walked away, leaving behind the soul-chilling wail of a woman who had lost everything. 6 months later, the court delivered its verdict. Alex and I were present at the hearing. At the defense table, Victor looked like an old man emaciated, his head shaved, completely gray. For murder, attempted murder with extreme cruelty, fraud, and other crimes, the court sentenced Victor to the highest penalty: life in prison without parole. When the judge struck the gavel, Alex collapsed to the floor and sobbed. After 6 years, Kate could rest in peace. That evening, Alex and I went to the cemetery. In the light of the setting sun, we burned a copy of the verdict on Kate's grave, watching the ashes fly into the sky. Rest easy, I whispered. It's over. I filed for divorce and left Boston. I returned to my small town in Ohio, to my parents, to a home with daisy bushes and warm bread. A year later, with my savings, I opened a small tea and pastry shop. It smells of fresh baking and tea here, and that aroma has forever erased the smell of acid from my memory. The scar on my arm has faded, becoming a symbol of my strength. In a marriage, a woman can make compromises, but she must never lose her sense of self-worth. Patience in the face of evil doesn't bring peace. It only feeds monsters. If you realize you're lying on a chopping block, don't close your eyes. Open them, sharpen your knives, and fight to your last breath. Your life is priceless. I wish for all women to be strong, bright, and free. Sitting on the porch of my tea shop, I feel a sense of peace. My journey from a weak victim to the woman who caught a maniac taught me the most important thing. A woman should have a cold heart for her enemies and a warm one for herself. If you see yourself in my story, if you are enduring abuse, don't be afraid to leave. Solitude and freedom is better than the illusion of a family with the devil. Be strong. Thank you for listening to my story to the end. Take care of yourselves.